Hey, folks, we are here live straight out of Gilas, California. I'm here with Elodia Esperanza Benitez this afternoon, who humored me with playing along for, some time here in the afternoon. We won't put a number on it, but we'll be hanging out talking about, your process. And I'm always fascinated with the stories that come out of your poetry. And we had a text thread going where she was dropping hella gems about how and why and what. And I'm like, damn, I want to share all these epiphanies with everybody's. And so I was like, hey, you want a live stream? And you said yes. So here we are. And super informal for the folks who don't know me and are catching me however you're coming across this mitote. Rosanna Alvarez, hanging out with poets, aiming for once a week or so, but we've had the chance to hang out with a few poets and just trying to figure out how to collectively thrive. You don't need to be a poet to tune in. You don't even need to care for poetry, but I guarantee you'll find a little gem in what's spoken today. So, Elodia, if you want to introduce yourself, because I know there's a full range of what you do, the things you do, and it doesn't matter what you're doing, you're always doing it poetically. So, throw that down while I check the sound systems over here in the background.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Elodia Esperanza Benitez. I am the daughter of Erlinda. I am the granddaughter of Elodia and Julie. And I am from Gilroy, been raised here my whole life. Um, it's funny you said that there's this the whole wide list, and yet the only introduction I can think of for myself is to say that I'm a poet. It informs everything that I am as a sister, as a daughter, as a friend, um, and it informs everything that I do, my how I show love, um, my activism, my everyday life. And so the simplest introduction I can come up with is, "Hi, I'm a poet."
I love that. That takes work for people to get to say, hi, I'm a poet. And we've had conversations about that, right? And I think some of the other poets in the queue have had so much to unpack just by way of that statement. And so that declaration, it really is jam packed, as simple as it is, right? Hi, I'm a poet. Uh, so when you say, hi, I'm a poet, what does that carry for you? What does that mean?
Um, it's a it's a it's a heavy word for me because it encompasses so much. Um, but through discussions that we've had and through my journey over the years to being who I am right now, um, I've learned that it's so important to um, make those declarations and say confident who you are. Because if not, then other people are going to tell you who you are.
That's the damn truth. They will tell you. And they will tell you a lot about who you're not. And I think one of the beautiful things about certain poets, and you in particular, is you're paying attention to who people are for you and for all of us, right? And it's kind of, I think I've described things this way before. We're windows and mirrors and doors for each other. And there's something beautiful about people who aren't expected to be poets, right? Because we're never expected to be poets, even though it's been a part of our ongoing legacy historically as a people. And so to show up and be like, hi, I'm a poet, it's also an act of defiance, right? It's also to some people almost feels like, for as much as we associate poetry with all of these beautiful things, there's something about when some of us show up and we declare, hi, I'm a poet, it feels like such an act of resistance. Does that resonate with you in any way?
It does, in the sense that when I say that I'm a poet and it informs everything that I am, and and I see it in all of these things. It really is in everything for me. So it's when you say that that there's this idea of not expecting somebody or something to be a poet or have poetry. Um, I try to in the things that I write to show the poetry and everything.
Yeah, and I don't want to put you on the spot with your poetry, but I know you've always got something at the ready. And so much so that, we've talked about you got your notebook everywhere. And um when I first learned, when you first shared that you write, I was like, "Oh my God, I could cry right now." And you whipped out your notebook and you're like, "So I kind of sort of write." And I was like, "There is no kind of sort of about it." And so to be here with you, on little interwebs and have you just be like, "Hi, I'm a poet." There's something there about how quick you got there that I think that oftentimes some of us folks, it's helpful to hear when someone who's younger than us reminds us like, "Hey, there's something powerful about getting to that declaration, and it's okay if you're not there yet, right? But if you feel it calling you, it's never gonna go away until you outright say it at least once, and then it almost becomes like this playful addiction of sorts. But I don't wanna put you on the spot, except I know that you're ready, so I don't feel like I'm putting you on the spot, and you've got some of those stories with you, and you've been working on a few different ones, and I'm not sure which ones you're gonna share with us today. But if you wouldn't mind kinda, because there's something about people hearing it, and then all of a sudden, everything you said in the last 5 minutes makes that much more sense, because there's a little bit of a glimpse into how you do what you do with so much love and tenderness, and ferocity at the same time.
Okay, I got poems, Rosanna. Um, I'm gonna pull it up from my phone because I left my little notebook. My little notebook's in the living room today. Um, but I'm gonna read this one. It's called Alegría. Alegría. Amaya calls it joy, with a fresh nail set clicking in the Steinbeck sun. But she don't know him, 'cause her people don't buy grapes. Alegría, cruising with her homegirls through mother's green hair tendrils, faces kissed cool as they cackle and curse into a northern breeze. Alegría, Amaya calls it joy, to paper her walls in drawings of roses not yet grown, gardens of her own design. She calls it all alegría.
I'm letting you linger there because sometimes I get so excited that I jump in and I'm like, "Damn, we need that pause to take in that alegría." And there's something about the people you write about that makes them feel they are real, right? Because these are inspired by real people. But you said this beautiful phrasing, and I don't know if you remember it when I'm putting you on the spot. And it was something along the lines of like, you know, poems kind of carry a story. And oftentimes people think that poems reflect a story, but there's something about how they activate a whole ass story, even in a snippet of a poem.
Yes, Facebook Live. We get into deep conversations in the group chat, and one of them we were I had mentioned that um, in my poems, at least um, in some of them, they start off with a person, whether it's inspired by a loved one, a friend, somebody I've met in life, or even parts of myself. They start off with a person. That's in a few of I like to give names to the people that I'm writing about, and so in Alegría, it's it's something to say, yes, this girl is experiencing joy and the peace of cruising with her friends, but it's another thing to give her a name, and then she
Mm,
becomes real to me.
right, right. And present. And there's something important about declaring a presence for all of these stories and voices and characters and people that are coming across in your poetry. And so I love bearing witness to that chat thread because I'm like, there's so many goodies in here. Like, even if we're not meeting every week or what have you, there's something always there that helps me untangle myself. And I can't wait to have like the whole collection of Alegría and Company or whatever you choose to entitle it with, right? It's like it's all there and something about how when you put them all together, it's like they're in conversation with each other. But
Well, I think. Oh, what was
go
that?
ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead,
I
because I want
think we've touched on it before, where um, so much of when I write is about making a connection with people. Early on, when I was younger, I had people tell me, you know, like, oh, like I really I resonated with what you were saying, and for me that was so important because I was, I speak to myself, but I think um, when it comes to writing and art and things like that, um, it's so important to make a connection with people, with who you're writing to. And so early on, I decided, you know, I know who I'm writing to.
and that makes a big difference. And I don't know if you're willing or wanting to share, but in your words, who are you writing to?
It it depends. Sometimes I'm writing to myself. Sometimes I'm writing to, um, you know, the girl that I was, the girls who are, young girls, older
Mm.
women who are reminiscing. Sometimes I'm writing to, somebody who's in a hard place. Sometimes I'm writing to, um, somebody who maybe hasn't heard um, that hasn't heard somebody speaking to them before.
And I
Um,
totally get it, right? Because it's like in some ways you're writing just the same way that you started off with to yourself. But then what does that mean? And there are so many pieces of you and there's so much diversity even within your own experience that you get at all of these pockets. And so I see you kind of searching for the who am I writing to when I know damn well who I'm writing to, like to articulate it and trying not to leave anyone out because it's that even in that one singular experience, right? Like your experience, it's so interwoven into so many other experiences that make you who you are. So when people say I'm writing to myself, that means a lot of different things and it's very contextual, right? Like I feel like in a lot of ways you're writing to me and I'm a whole other person from you, but at the same time there's overlapping experience. And at the same time we've had this conversation about I love me some poetry that talks about the trees. Shit, I've written some myself talking about Mississippi. I ain't never been to Mississippi. I don't know if I ever want to go to Mississippi, but it's there because we've had to read so many poems of these experiences that while they sounded beautiful and lyrical and had their value, there was still this sense of, well, where's my sense of belonging in all of that?
where am
And
I? Yeah, where am I in here?
and I think one of the beautiful things about your poetry and um, thinking back to conversations that we've had where you've articulated certain things about legacy and what you leave behind, like that book on the shelf for some young girl who had a similar experience to you in Gilroy in particular, what does that mean, right? Or places like that. And there's something powerful there because I think I said to you in that moment, and I'm like, yeah, I can't wait till my girls see that because the way that they're defined by all of these systems and people is very detached from who they actually are. So then to see and to hear your poetry reflect back some tenderness and some ferocity at the same time about who they've always been, it means something different that shouldn't be taken for granted, right?
It's important because especially when you're young, they're like little lifelines that come out towards you. I can only count a handful of times as a kid reading through something or seeing something that reached out and was like, I feel seen. I understand this feeling. This person understands, is speaking to me directly.
Hmm.
Um, and so I don't know. I just always came away with the impression of there needs to be more of this, and if I'm not finding it, then I need to create it.
Yeah. And I don't know if you had in your plans to read this poem. You don't have to by any means, but I
Which one?
have it like right behind me, the Name Her Esperanza. And so you submitted a poem to Eastside Magazine, and it was Name Her Esperanza. And there was something like, I know that's your middle name, but it was a whole ass story in itself. And there was so much that was relatable, and there was so much that resonated, and there was so much that serendipitously overlapped with other people we had in that issue. And so I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about what inspires your process or that particular poem, or if you want to throw down that poem, you let me know. But
I got no problem throwing down that poem. While I look for it, though,
there were layers
let
on that one.
um, let me just say, names are such an important thing, and um, my name in particular, my first name, I'm named after my grandmother, my mom's mom, who died when she was very young, and my middle name, you know, being a very, the word Esperanza is so, it's long and it's heavy, and it doesn't fall off the mouth gracefully, um, you know, and so I've grown up with what I've seen as always being a very heavy name.
Mm.
And so when I was sitting and thinking about, this poem that came to me sitting in a car, um, I was like, I just sat in the weight of it.
Mm.
So let me find her. Girl, where
Yeah.
are you?
While you're
Okay.
finding Esperanza Extraviada, while you're looking for Esperanza there, that's a poem in itself. You said really quick, the poem found you while you were in the car, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
want to come back to that, how poems find you. But before I kind of go there, because that's an extended conversation, let's have you throw that one down if you want.
Yeah, we'll get back to that one. But this one is called Name Her Esperanza. You can find it in the previous edition of Eastside Magazine. Go check
I'll
it out.
link to it in a second too.
All right. Name her Esperanza, not for hope's sake. Give her a name to yell when she isn't listening, to curl and prick like bush thorns. Name her Esperanza. It makes for big tattoos, wants for softness, but falls too bold off the tongue. Name her Esperanza. Let her rumble through it. She'll unsettle bones like passing thunder, long enough to grow into, settle her spine into. Name her Esperanza, not for hope, but for what it takes. Punctuate that with a coffee sip.
Not for hope, but for what it and that, right? It's like every line in there is a poem. And for folks who aren't sure where to find it, if you want to read it in full, it's there. I would just be like, let me put this on replay because there's something about hearing folks talk their poems out loud, right? Read, recite, speak, share. Even if we're simply reading, there's something about the voice of the person who received these words, right? Like you said, from your car. And so that in itself is a process because there are poems that'll find me in moments where I'm like, yo, words right now is not the time. I am on the freeway and I've had to pull over because a poem will just be like, I said now. And I'm like, freaking crap. And so there are snippets that are either in my phone or on the back of receipts. I will write them on a napkin if I have to. Like my kids have seen this sense of
Yeah.
urgency of like these words are here. And I'll be damned if I'm not going to get them down. So what is that process of a poem coming to you in the car like that?
That's why I always carry my little book with me. It's always in my bag because I'll be sitting in the car and then all of a sudden, a phrase. It's not. It's funny how the creative process works. I know we've talked about it so many times, but it's like a flash. It's a person you see passing by. It's a word that's been floating around your head for maybe a day or two that suddenly links up with some other words and becomes a phrase. Um, Anywhere, yeah, that one in particular, I had some downtime waiting for my cousin to come out of the doctor's office or something, and I'm just sitting there, um, and I said my name out loud, and I was like, oh wait, and it all started coming together. What I really pictured was my mother when she's mad at me. I'm not Elodia, I'm not daughter, I'm not love you. When she's like trying to get my attention, I'm Esperanza. My head turns real quick. um, and so that's where it was born from.
And
Um,
it got your attention in that same way, right? So, and
yeah,
that's the thing of these poems have a life of their own, and they've got their own plans, right? And I kind of feel like sometimes I'm just here in translation, and it's a bit,
you're just like funneling it through. You're just putting it down.
yeah. And so for you, you have the ability to throw down these quick snippets. And I think we've had this conversation before, right? Like, how do you know when a poem is finished? And And I know we had our conversation in the moment, but I'm wondering, like, here and now, what does that feel like to you? How do you know when a poem is finished?
I mean, to say that it lets you know sounds a little too like simplistic, like you just know. But um, to kind of break, I mean, to give it some context, like you just there's something about the flow, you know, the words they're coming to you and everything's coming together, and then the flow kind of just ends, like it dissipates for me, anyways. Um, it just tells me, yeah, we're done.
Right? And
Um,
that's funny because that's the same answer I think I gave you in that moment was like, "It'll let you know." So it's like to see you come through and then have all of these snippets, and I'm like, "Damn, she picked that up real quick. The poems let her know for sure," you know? And it's they do, they feel finished. They feel like, some people would say that expression, "a breath of fresh air," and I'm like, "No, they don't feel like a breath of fresh air, they feel like a breath of life." Like, to me, reading it, when you share them, they always feel like a breath of life, and that can mean so many things, right? Because life is complicated, and you don't shy away from showing the complexity of all of the patchwork of mujeres that you tend to write about a lot of women, right? You have
I do.
Alegría, you have Esperanza, and you have several others that you've shared that it's almost like, and we've said this before, we can almost see them as a combined, ongoing series on a stage or something, what have you.
It's
Um,
very intentional that I write about women, the women of my, poems inspired by the women in my life or my friends or um, women that I've who may not even be friends, who but little snippets that I've experienced um, over the years. But it's very intentional because I was raised practically purely by women, of the women of my family.
Speaking
And
of, that one
there's
right here giving you the, "Hey,
the right there. That's my mother.
that's your mama." Super
that's one of
supportive.
that's one of the women. Um, and they each left a little piece of themselves within me, and I see it as there's no um, better gift I can offer than to
Hmm,
honor them in in the things that I write. Because you touched a little bit on leaving a legacy, uh, and the things that I write in this way, you know,
hmm.
they live here. I have a few poems about my nana who I was very close to, and she's no longer with us. But the poems that I write about her are little memorials that go on, you know, because they connect with somebody else who had an Anna that they love,
Yeah.
or a mother, or a figure, a mother figure. Um, and in that way, I've honored her and I've continued that legacy.
And that's deeply personal, and yet in the same way that you described it, it might resonate and memorialize someone else through the same poem or otherwise, right? And case in point, so when you shared that Esperanza poem, and I was like, we have to have it for the magazine. And it fit in line because that was like coincidentally our freaking theme. And then here's the poetry exactly the way you just described the importance of how you memorialize things for yourself. Turned out that one of the other folks that we featured in that magazine, his grandmother's name was Esperanza, and there was a whole story attached to that, and I'm like, "How freaking wild is that and serendipitous and how poetic," right? And I think that that for me is exactly why I like having these conversations with all y'all who humor me and play with me here for anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour, because there's something about when you see us collectively, even if it's not on purpose, there's something about showing up with purpose that ties us all together in that very kinda like that healing self kinda way, right? Not healing selves, but healing self, like, here's the pomada of poetry and, like, we have access to it because it's being shared. Um, and a lot of times, you know, the folks that I've had the privilege of sitting down with for an hour or so were people who we've made that declaration, right? We've said, "Yeah, I'm here. My name is Rosanna and I'm a poet." And you're showing up and you're like, "My name's Elodia and I'm a poet." And we're like, "Hell yes, we are." And still, right, we'll show up and we'll be like, "I love when poets come to visit." And at the same time, when something's taking place where you are and have lived and have grown up, how do we keep overlooking each other in that way? And so I'm always like, how do we notice each other when it's not really about the accolades or any of the but it's the ability to share with the folks who need to hear it and need to access it in different ways, right? Because your poetry is there and you're sharing it and it's having ripples. But there's something about reminding people, like, yes, you're here, you're a poet, and it becomes like an ongoing declaration. You know what I'm saying?
I know what you're saying.
Like we gotta
Um,
remind people sometimes, even though we don't really care to be reminding people sometimes, but there's an like, for me, I feel an urgency to be like, I need to make sure the people this is gonna resonate with know where to find what they might need, right? And they might not need it, but that might help them get to the thing that they need. You know what?
we'll get together one of these weekends and we'll set up a little stand. And
Seriously.
we'll hand out our poems and
It's
we'll
like a
set up a little
lemonade stand,
microphone.
no, but it's a poetry stand for real.
Yeah, you could bring your little microphone that you have, and we'll just recite them on the corner.
That's right. We'll bring a megaphone. And I wonder, right? Because when people say, like, there are no artists or there are no poets or I can't find them or and I'm like, "But are do we really?" It's not that we don't exist, you know?
No, you just gotta look for it. I mean, I don't know. I can't say to that I have. It's funny. Um, there are there are poets who resonate with me, but I can't say that I'm super, you know, well literary versed in terms of, like, you know, I have this large, um, you know, codex of poets that I can reach for at any given time, um, and that just comes from um, availability. You
Mm,
know, I didn't grow up hearing the words of Maya Angelou. I found her one day, and I
yeah,
started reading it through, or um, you know, poets like Gloria and Zuba, who you know, I sought her out only after, you know, I learned who she was.
right, right. So it's like this ongoing process of damn, we're here, right? And I think that reminds me of a few months back when we're like, let's have this poetry, if we were in regular times, we would have an open mic and do the thing. We were like, let's just do it. And leading up to it, we ended up featuring a poet a day, right, for that whole month. And I
I learned
was,
so much.
yeah, I did too, even about some of the poets that I'm like, they've been near and dear to my heart and they don't even know it. They were my healing self long time ago. And to revisit and then to learn about new ones that I'm like, how did I not know this? How, you know what I'm, it's just like this ongoing
Hmm.
process of, it's almost like when they unearth the statue of, Koyoshauki or whatever, like it's not even that they don't make themselves visible, it's that they've been buried. And I feel like even for folks like us, there's an idea of what a poet is supposed to look like or how they're supposed to exist, or that it's somehow in today's world where we have access to the internet, you got to keep reminding people so that they know that this, you know what I mean, like, but at
Hmm.
the same time I'm like, but is there something that we're missing in that that's going to get lost in translation? Because what I love about what to me feel like everyday poets is you might be there across the table from me and I know you, like, I'm just talking examples here. I might know you like a teacher or I might know you like a counselor. And the only reason why I might know you as a poet is because it's come up in conversation serendipitously or in its own poetic way, where I'm thinking to myself, like, how many poets do we miss because we're so used to the identifying markers of what a poet is supposed to be that we miss out on so many beautiful things. And so I'm trying to notice, like, how do I how do I notice, or you know, how do I change my frequency to attract more people to be like, yes, this is what I do? Because there's no way that, you know, there's only, for example, two Chicana poets in Gilroy right now. Like that, it cannot be the case. And I know it's not the case. And so part of what we've talked about is like, how do we encourage people to be like, oh, by the way, yes, I'm a poet, right? When all
Hmm.
you've ever been taught is kind of this air of dismissiveness because it doesn't look like what it's supposed to look like.
Um, I'm not sure. I don't
I'm
know.
not sure either. I'm thinking out loud. Like, not to put you on the spot, be like, tell me, Elodia, how do we fix this? I don't think any of us knows, right? So I know for sure you've got plans for your poetry and your poems, and you've been so generous in showing folks your process, and a poem will be ready and you're like, here you go, folks, I'm putting it out there.
I
For-
think actually that the words like they came to me now. Um,
Mm,
it's about it's going back to that connection. Some people, they don't need the go ahead to just share who they are and throw down their words, and some people need that that permission of like, hey, you know what, this is a space for you, or this is you have a place here. So you know for us, I think it falls to us to continue putting in that work and to making those connections, to reach out. And even if um, the invitation doesn't get accepted right away, there's going to be that day where someone comes up and like, hey, you know the here's me, here's my poems.
right. And that poems exist in a variety of ways. And I think it's a beautiful thing to acknowledge it in that way from your own perspective, right? Because it's like there are so many people, even when you are on a microphone, even when you do have, publishing experience, that will still be like, well, do you have this? And do you have this? And have you done this? And then it's almost like a string of trying to discredit you. And I don't pay too much mind to that because I've had the beautiful experience of having folks share their poetry with me that have no desire of being on a microphone or in any kind of limelight. And that's just how their poetry rolls. And I'm like, I respect that, right? And at the same time, I've had people where it's like, okay, yes, you've published books. Yes, you've got an audience, and maybe our audiences are maybe we're writing to different people, right? And there's something about how we're almost actively taught to disrespect that more so than we are to honor it and encourage it. And so I kind of feel like these little snippets of hanging out with all y'all once a week or sometimes less than that is my effort to be like, I am actively trying to defy that assumption and presumption about people. Because there are people who will just abandon their notebooks, right? After having had an experience like that and be like, well, I ain't doing that because somebody made me feel shitty about all the things that, you know, maybe I didn't even have a desire to engage with. So I guess what I'm asking you out of all of that freaking monologue is what might you say to someone who is, writing over there in secret? And I know there are folks who are okay doing that, but there are folks, and you know this, who are like, there's something in me that feels compelled to want to share this. And so people working through that little hesitation or working toward that declaration, what little gems of wisdom might you have for them or words of encouragement?
I love to hear you talk. If it seems like I'm just sitting here, it's because I just love to listen. She just goes off on these little tangents, and I just like to like sit and soak. I've never been in one of her classes, but I feel like I am like I'm sitting and she's my professor, and I just
Mm.
listen to her, and I'm like, oh yes, and it just feeds my soul. Um,
I'm like, "This commercial is not paid." Just kidding.
and I just soak it all in. No, for those who are, who hide their notebooks and who, keep them to themselves, that was, yeah, I can relate. That was, when you met me, I pulled out my little notebook, timid and shy, because, you know, for me sitting right here, you were a college professor, and you had just thrown down, actually, you had just read a poem there too, and it was like about like the injustices that you had faced in the school district, and it was
Mhm.
just super like powerful and compelling. And here I am pulling out my little notebook of like, oh, I have this one right here. Me too. But it was that you had left such an impression on me
Hmm.
that I saw, I saw that open door, and I slipped my foot in there just a little bit, just to show you, like, me too, me too. um and made that connection,
Mhm.
so I think if you're wanting to share your poetry, your writing, then that desire is there. You feel it. You feel the little tugs when you see
Yeah.
something, or when you hear someone, you feel it. Or when the opportunities are there and you don't take them because you're hesitant, you feel that tug. um and for those that don't, for those who, it's a source of comfort, and they like, keeping certain things, keeping those right there close to their heart, to themselves. That's a good thing too. you know there are some times when words, they come to me, and I'm like, okay, not yet. Like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna keep this right here just for now. you know the difference is that I always feel compelled to share, and to overshare.
Oh, me too. Me too, but I still have
And
those
then
secret writings, right? I'm like, these are just
eventually
here
they'll
right
work
now.
their way out.
Yeah, I feel that. And see, I always wonder, like, what if I had showed up in a different way for you that day and was like, "No." I mean, that's not in line with who the hell I am, but I know, like, we've all experienced that at some point in our lives, right? Where you're, like, looking for that just to put your foot in the door, just to be like, "Let me" a little bit of affirmation or what have you, like, ultimately, you're gonna get to that permission on your own. The journey might be windy, but it kind of feels like oftentimes we're always and not always, right? Oftentimes we're hit with a, like, no mames. It's like a no, not right now. Or and you don't even know if it's really about you and your words or if it's that person that day, you know what I mean? And so I always like to remind myself even like I might take a risk and share certain pieces of me, poetry or otherwise, and the outcome might end up having me kind of retreat back into being like, "Oh, well, I'm not putting that out there again." And so I always feel like I even gotta hype myself up, even, being perceived certain positive ways by other people. And I feel like that's life, right? Like people are gonna shut doors in your face all the time. And we have a choice. And it's not always easy because systems know how to lock the gates real good. And they know how to get a bunch of us complicit in doing that so that, you know, there's a reason why when you go to the bookstore, it's hard to find a poet who looks like you, even though there are so many who have written and published throughout the decades, and in some instances even resorted to self-publishing because the doors were so under lock and key, right? And so it's that reminder, like, if you're publishing and now you're not publishing, or if you haven't published but you have the collection there, or if you're sharing and somebody's like, "I'm not down with what you just shared," like, that's fine. That's their problem. Keep doing your thing and you keep keeping on, right? Like, and I feel that even for myself on the daily and being like, it's not for everybody, right? I might not be everybody's cup of tea, but you know what? I'm lovable like pan dulce, and there are people in the world who don't like that either. Right? So it's imagine for me, it's always like if there's just that one person, those two people, that it kind of reminds them of who we
Hmm.
are, then I'm like, I feel I'm gonna keep on writing. And if it makes me feel better, right? Or if it makes me feel shittier, but it makes me it helps me find the words to feel something and park something somewhere when I don't know what to do with some of those feelings. Like it's writing is so healing in so many ways because it lets us put all kinds of shit somewhere, right?
Yeah, and that's the thing though, is that there's a freedom in I know who I'm writing to,
Mm,
and you know I don't um I don't care that you're not that this isn't for you. It's specifically not for you. Sometimes
right.
I'm specifically talking to someone or to a certain audience um, when I write, and it's so important to have places where you know it's just
Mhm.
us. It's
Yeah,
just us, and we can bask in the glow of what we all as a community, what we understand, and those shared experiences that are unique to who we are.
right.
You know,
Yeah.
when I talk about certain things, when I talk about um, you know, right here, like the East Side Park, I have a couple um, of poems about it. That's just for people who know what it's like to sit right there and to hear the handballs echo off the walls and to hear the music and to sit in the breeze. I'm just talking to them. And if you've
And
never been there, then it's deliberately not for you.
yep. Yep. And not everybody's gonna know what a handball sounds like bouncing off the wall. And some of us
Echoing off the
immediately
wall, standing in
immediately
the shadow of the murals, and
mm,
you know listening to you guys practice right there. you know it's a beautiful thing. It's poetry. It's poetry all around you.
yeah. Yeah, and I love that you have the ability to capture that for the folks who do know, right? And need to revisit that in that way because that's I think the premise of danza is that we're always in ceremony and there's something about poetry that feels like an extension of that. And so when you were talking, it's like at first the phrase that came to mind was validation and then self-validation and then it was community validation. And that's where it kind of settled with me. And it was like there are entire communities that are oftentimes not even seen as fully human and are treated in that way. And there's something about a poem reclaiming that humanity so that collectively we're validated not by the folks who put themselves in power or the powers that be, but by ourselves and our communities, and that matters on a whole other level. And that
Mhm.
sometimes that same audience isn't going to go looking for our poetry in certain spaces that are deemed automatically valid. And so for me, it always feels like that doesn't discount those avenues for me, but it does give what I'm doing right now and the way that I'm doing it a different meaning in the way that you captured it, right? Like, how do I make sure that it gets reflected back to the people I am writing to? And that sometimes that really is me and just me, and that's okay and it's necessary and important. So I love that you graciously give me an inside glimpse into some of your stuff before it makes its way out there, and I'm like, "I feel so selfishly greedy getting that VIP glimpse first," and then it comes out, right, like, you'll publish it on your Instagram page, and for folks who are like, "Where do I find this Instagram page?" Let me tell you, you find it right here. There's something just beautiful about being like, "It's there," right? And I could come back to it for as long as you keep it out there. Um, so I know we're getting down to the final few minutes here, and we've talked about a few different things. And I know you've got a whole slew of other poems right there in the palm of your hand. And I don't know if you want to share a couple more or close us out with some gems for the taking. You tell me.
Let's see. Let's see. I had a whole list. Full disclosure, I had a list of poems. I'm like, okay, this is what I'm gonna share. This is what I'm gonna throw out there. This is the one. And then um, that totally got blown out of the water because you were like, oh, share this one, and I'm like, where am I being led to right now?
Where are the poems leading you to at the end of the day?
Where did we? Because we took a different road than I expected, and now this one, it's no longer applicable. So let's see what pulled up. Oh, I got a new one. So staying true to you know these characters of women that I write about with. This is one that I wrote recently, uh, called Salma. Salma, born beautiful, to a mother thought severe, was lauded by all for her sable thick hair, slender soft shape, smoke dark eyes. Her mother, with hair pulled taut, told Salma she had known too many days of flowers, had blossomed fragrant, richly colored in red, and left too easily swayed by the passing of seasons. Hands too soft to hold upright in wind, delicate feet cannot stand in the sun, succumb to cold. Her mother, bitter in her cold, left her outside.
I just want to go get her from the cold, but I have a feeling that she okay now. And that's the thing. You hit so much depth in the little snippets of story that you give us by way of your poem that it's never like I always feel like I almost have the whole novel of a story by way of a poem that might take up, those little 5 by 5 Instagram squares. And so that is that's a skill. I mean, that is a skill. There's depth and there's a complicated existence, right? And I don't know if I'm sure it is. There's a purpose behind this part. But even when you left with that final line on that one, it's like it called on me to show up differently, right? Because my automatic response was like, "Damn, I want to take care of this person." And I'm like, "Girl," it almost felt like the poem talking back to me, being like, "How you know she not all right?" Like there's an ongoing complexity that almost feels like you know how when people say when you drop a pebble and there's ripples. I'm like, she threw the whole damn boulder with the microphone, and it's like you're gonna feel this, and it's gonna come back, and it's gonna hit you differently as you go on about your day.
Thank you. You know what? It's a front because years ago I learned, that writing actual prose maybe wasn't for me. You know, fiction. Don't expect the great novel by Elodia Esperanza Benitez anytime soon. They're all just going to be poetic anthologies.
Well, you know what? There's that
Because I
you
discovered I could tell a story in 15 lines rather than 15 pages.
and I love that because there are so many folks who I come across who are like, I read constantly, and then I'll go on a dry spell, and then I feel like I'm starving myself, and I'm like, "Why am I not reading 7 books right now?" And so for me, reading has always been tied into my own, escape and healing and talk about community validation. But there's something about a poem that invites people to accomplish the same. I don't know if I can call it a sense of satisfaction, but I know you know what I'm talking about. It's like, I'm gonna leave this for you, and it's short, and it's digestible, and it's gonna hit you all the same. And so even though you're saying you'll never see the great novel by la la la, and I'm like, I don't know, I kind of see you defying the structure of a traditional novel by way of this anthology. And people can take it one poem at a time and come back to it whenever they're ready. And that there's there's an assumption that novels lead to completion, and they never really do. And in that way, your poems kind of do that in a much, much shorter frame.
I think, um, and again, it's cool how everything keeps going back. Um, I don't know if you could hear the trucks outside. They're like the sounds of the neighborhoods. It's like my neighbor towing his car and people driving semis through residential neighborhoods.
Life happening.
um, I had a moment where I would read certain poems and I would find my attention kind of slipping after like the 27th line, and I had a thought to myself of like, you could have said this so much more directly
Mm,
and captured the essence so much quicker. And so you'll find in a lot of my poems that they're very not they're very to the point, um, to where anybody could read them. It's so important for me to be accessible
mm,
for everybody, for the people in my life. I want, you know, the 12-year-old to read it and feel something, and I want the college
mm,
professor, you to read it and feel something. And I want my tia, who doesn't really read except for the Bible, to read it and feel something. And so going back, it's so important for me
mm.
to make that connection with whoever. I don't ever want to not be accessible to someone.
Yeah. And that feels like a poetic act of defiance in your declaration of I am Elodia and I'm a poet. Because if we look at what we've been taught and what we sometimes are asked to teach other people, there's this idea that we're going to get through by way of accomplishment. And what does that mean? And how do we unpack that? And your poetry is inviting people to feel, you know? It's almost in defiance of that accomplishment. They can coexist, but there's something about feel it, right? We're not supposed to feel. We're supposed to be resilient, and we're supposed to survive, and we're supposed to let ourselves feel just enough of what's manageable, and figure out what to do with the rest and how to channel it. And you're saying, no, I want you to feel this. And that feels like resistance. Yeah. So I know we're getting to the final stretch. I always like to let the poets decide how they want to end the little segment here, and it's up to you. You can close out with another poem if you want. You can drop some other gems of wisdom here. Um, but again, for the folks tuning in, I try to play with poets every so often here on the live stream, as imperfectly perfect as we are, with phones ringing and crows doing their thing in the background and our neighborhoods having their everyday spats and joy and all. So thank you for humoring me, Elodia. How you want to close out today?
I want to close out with a feeling, since that's where our discussion is ending. This is untitled because it's all based on a feeling.
Mm.
The blanket is a touch too warm and lies heavy, pulled up to my chin. The braid in my hair makes my neck itch. The pillows are starched white, joining my face to their powder scent of Tres Caras cream. Nana is asleep on my right, her snores buzzing lightly. I lie stock still, so as not to break the spell. If I lie very still, I can stay forever, basking in the peace of the oscillating fan moving still air, the comfort of Nana's ever presence, that had earlier whispered prayers with me at the foot of her bed. Golden girls playing low, washing away the dark in muted pastels. I lay here with my Nana forever until morning.
No lie, I felt that. I did feel that. And there were so many, in fancy terminology, what we call those signifiers, right? It's like they activate, like all these lines activate this collective memory. And it's almost like we could smell where you were and what it felt like, and definitely called on feelings to show up. So, folks, that was Elodia Esperanza Benitez, Girls with Heavy Names and Such, writing to heal ourselves. And can't wait when you bust out that anthology and it could take up some space on the shelf. And
I can't wait.
And I love that you offer up a quick fix by way of your Instagram, and it's there and we have it for when we need it, because it sometimes feel like we need it daily. So again, we've reached the end of our time. Thank you all for humoring us and dropping in and echándoles porras, uh, these everyday collective poets being in conversation with ourselves and each other. And with that, folks, we'll catch you on the next one. Have a good time.